Growing up, my family was deeply religious. Devout Christians who ensured Sundays were spent in church services and Wednesdays in youth group. Although I'm far from religious now, those formative years planted an acute awareness of the paranatural within me. As I transitioned into adulthood, independence turned to rebellion. I sought enlightenment in psychedelic experiences rather than scripture. My priorities shifted to exploring altered states of consciousness, even at the cost of securing a stable place to live. Living as a young drifter in a small farm town nestled in the heart of the Willamette Valley, life offered few options. Most kids my age either fell into substance abuse, worked at one of the countless vineyards, or became entangled with the cults that seemed to sprout like weeds in the area. The encounter. One particular night, around 10 p.m., my friend Matt and I were lingering behind the local dive bar, bumming cigarettes off the patrons. It was a usual gathering of about 5 people, not counting Matt and me. Tipsy laughter and exaggerated tales filled the cool night air as we passed the time in camaraderie. Then, he appeared. A man I'd never seen before stepped out of the bar. He was peculiar, unsettling even. Standing around 5.5 feet tall, his proportions seemed off. His face bore a thick, burly mustache that clashed jarringly with his features. Topping his head was a cowboy hat, comically oversized, paired with a leather jacket over a plain white tank top, leather pants, and boots that completed his bizarre ensemble. He stood there, seemingly trying to integrate into the group, yet there was an invisible barrier, a palpable divide, that kept him apart. For 10 minutes, he lingered, a specter on the edge of our little circle. Then, he began to speak. "It's my birthday," he announced, his voice a grating mix of enthusiasm and something darker, something I couldn't quite place. From that moment on, nearly every word out of his mouth revolved around this fact. He needed a cigarette because it was his birthday. Someone ought to buy him a drink for his birthday. On and on it went. There was no escaping the birthday narrative. 30 minutes dragged by. The others began to drift away, leaving just Matt, the so-called birthday boy, and me. The unease that had been simmering inside me began to boil. He turned to us, his eyes gleaming with an unnatural intensity. "You guys know any abandoned buildings around here?" he asked. "Could you take me to one?" Every fiber of my being screamed at me to get away from him. It was as if some primal instinct had been activated, warning me of an imminent threat. I mumbled vague directions to a building that didn't exist, hoping he'd take the hint and leave. Instead, he persisted. "Come on," he coaxed. "Take me there. Celebrate my birthday with me. I've got gifts for you." The way he said gifts sent a shiver down my spine. I declined, claiming I had to get to a friend's house to sleep. That's when he leaned in, his face stretching into an inhuman grin. "I'll see you again, Noah," he said, my name dripping from his lips like a curse. Then, as if the universe itself decided to upend logic, he sprinted backward. Yes, backward. For about 30 feet before spinning on his heels and running off in the direction I had pointed. Matt and I exchanged a glance, terror mirrored in his wide eyes. Without a word, we bolted. We ducked through side streets, vaulted fences, and ran until we reached the sanctuary of Matt's house. Safe inside, we tried to shake off the encounter, lighting cigarettes and trying to laugh it off. 20 minutes later, as the smoke curled lazily in the air, I heard it, a voice, eerily melodic, crooning the familiar tune of "Happy Birthday to You." Heart pounding, I crept to the window and peered outside. There he was, the birthday boy, pacing up and down the street like a predator searching for prey. How had he found us? For an hour or more, he prowled, his boots striking the pavement with a rhythmic click-clack, click-clack. Finally, he stopped. Without warning, he sprinted away, disappearing into the night. Reflection. I never saw the birthday boy again, but his parting sounds, the echo of his boots on the asphalt, still haunt me. I don't know what he was, but I'm certain he wasn't human. To the birthday boy, wherever you are, let's keep it that way. No celebrations. Not now. Not ever. In the weeks that followed, the memory of the birthday boy lingered like a bad dream I couldn't shake. Every shadow seemed a little darker, every sound in the night a little sharper. Matt and I made a pact never to talk about that night, as if by ignoring it we could somehow make it disappear. But deep down, I knew better. Something had shifted, a line crossed, and there was no going back. At first, I chalked my paranoia up to the adrenaline rush of that bizarre encounter. But then the dreams started. Vivid, oppressive dreams where I was trapped in an endless labyrinth, the walls echoing with the haunting refrain of "Happy Birthday to You." Sometimes I'd hear the rhythmic click-clack of his boots behind me, growing louder and faster until I woke up gasping for air. One night, I dreamt that I was back in the alley behind the bar. The birthday boy stood there, his grin wider than ever, holding a wrapped gift in his hands. He extended it toward me, whispering, "Open it, Noah." I'd wake up before I could see what was inside, my heart racing like I'd run a marathon. It wasn't long before the dreams bled into my waking life. Small things at first, the feeling of being watched, the occasional shadow that didn't belong. One afternoon, as I walked home from the grocery store, I spotted a figure standing at the far end of the street. He was too far away to see clearly, but something about the way he stood sent a chill down my spine. When I blinked, he was gone. Then there were the gifts. They started appearing on my doorstep, small, crudely wrapped packages with no return address. The first one contained a single black feather, glossy and pristine. The second held a tiny music box that played "Happy Birthday to You" in slow, haunting tones. Each gift was more unsettling than the last. Matt tried to convince me it was a prank, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He was just as unnerved as I was. By this point, I was barely holding it together. I stopped going out at night, my curtains stayed drawn, and I jumped at every unexpected noise. My life had become a series of sleepless nights and anxious days. The birthday boy wasn't just a memory. He was a shadow that loomed over every aspect of my existence. One night, unable to take the suffocating silence of my apartment, I called Matt. He didn't answer. That wasn't unusual. Matt was known for being unreliable with his phone, but something about it felt wrong this time. The next morning, I went to his house. His car was in the driveway, but when I knocked, there was no answer. The door was unlocked, so I let myself in. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made my skin crawl. I found Matt in his living room, sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. He looked up when I called his name, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. "He was here," Matt whispered. "Last night." Matt told me he'd heard a knock at the door around midnight. Thinking it was me, he'd opened it without hesitation. Standing there, bathed in the dim glow of the porch light, was the birthday boy. He didn't say a word, just handed Matt a small, wrapped gift and walked away. "I didn't open it," Matt said, his voice trembling. "I threw it in the trash." But when we went to check, the trash was empty. The gift was gone. "What does he want?" Matt asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that whatever this was, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Matt's encounter with the birthday boy marked the beginning of a new wave of horrors. It was no longer just the lingering fear of shadows and unexplainable noises. Now, it was personal. The gifts began to escalate. Every few nights, something new would appear, always waiting at my doorstep by morning. One night, it was a photograph of Matt and me taken at the bar that night. Neither of us had ever seen a camera. The next, it was a small piece of cake, the frosting perfectly pristine despite being left outside. I didn't dare taste it, and when I threw it away, I found it back on my counter the following morning, untouched but undeniably the same slice. The most chilling, however, was a small handwritten card that simply read, "See you soon, Noah." I couldn't take it anymore. The uncertainty gnawed at me, keeping me awake at night and leaving me too distracted to function during the day. I became obsessed with figuring out who, or what, the birthday boy was. I scoured the internet, searching for any mention of similar encounters. Urban legends, local myths, conspiracy theories, none of it provided answers. It was as though he existed entirely outside of any logic or reason. Matt, on the other hand, was falling apart. His paranoia was worse than mine. He started refusing to leave his house altogether, barricading himself inside and cutting off contact with everyone. When I visited, he wouldn't let me in, instead talking to me through the door in hushed, frantic whispers. He claimed to hear the sound of boots pacing outside his house at night and was convinced the birthday boy was inside his walls. "He's not just after us," Matt told me one day, his voice shaking. "He's everywhere, watching, waiting." A week later, I received a text from Matt in the middle of the night. It was a single sentence: "I can't do this anymore." Panicked, I raced to his house. The place was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels alive. The front door was unlocked, swinging open slightly as though inviting me in. I stepped inside, calling his name. There was no response. I found him in his bedroom. He was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, staring blankly ahead. In his lap was another gift, this one larger than any before. It was wrapped in the same crude paper, the edges uneven and torn in places. He didn't acknowledge me as I approached, didn't flinch when I said his name. It was as though he were in a trance. "Matt," I said, shaking his shoulder. He didn't respond. My gaze fell to the gift in his lap. Against my better judgment, I reached out and tore at the paper. Inside was a single object, a pair of cowboy boots, worn and scuffed, the soles caked with dried mud. A faint smell of smoke and something metallic wafted up from them. Matt suddenly looked at me, his eyes wide and full of terror. "It's too late," he whispered. "He's here." The lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a brief moment before the bulb buzzed back to life. When I turned back to Matt, he was gone. The boots lay abandoned on the floor, but there was no sign of him anywhere. I searched the entire house, shouting his name, but it was as though he had vanished into thin air. As I stood in the middle of his empty living room, the sound of boots striking the pavement echoed faintly outside. Click-clack, click-clack. My blood turned to ice. Slowly, I walked to the window and peered out. The street was empty, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, until it felt as though it were coming from right behind me. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest, but there was nothing there. And then, from somewhere in the shadows, came the voice. Low and sing-song, it sent shivers down my spine. "Happy birthday to you." The sound of boots resumed, retreating into the distance until all that remained was silence. I left Matt's house that night, abandoning any hope of finding him. Deep down, I knew the truth. He was gone, claimed by whatever force the birthday boy represented. Now, I live in a state of perpetual fear. The gifts still come, though less frequently. The dreams are worse than ever, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every knock at the door, every unexpected sound, sets my heart racing. I know he's out there, waiting for the right moment to make his move. And when he does, I'll be ready. Or at least, I hope I will. Because there's one thing I've come to understand about the birthday boy. You don't find him. He finds you. It had been months since Matt disappeared. Months of torment and sleepless nights. I'd moved to a new city, hoping to escape the birthday boy's relentless pursuit. The gifts stopped for a while, and the dreams faded to faint echoes of dread. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe it was over. But deep down, I knew better. One cold December night, as I returned from my shift at a dingy diner, I found a package waiting at my doorstep. My stomach twisted in knots as I stared at it. It was wrapped in that same crude paper, edges frayed and corners torn. My hands trembled as I picked it up, feeling its weight. This one was heavier than the others, and as I carried it inside, I felt the oppressive air of familiarity return. I sat at the kitchen table, the package before me. For what felt like hours, I simply stared at it, debating whether to open it or toss it into the fire. But a morbid curiosity, a need for closure, compelled me. With a deep breath, I tore away the paper. Inside was a photo album, its leather cover worn and cracked. I flipped it open, my heart pounding. The first photograph was of Matt and me from years ago, smiling and carefree. The next was the two of us at the bar that fateful night. As I turned the pages, the photos grew darker, more sinister. There were images of Matt in his living room, staring at the wrapped gift. Images of me asleep in my apartment, my face twisted in restless torment. Images of the birthday boy standing in the shadows, his grin wide and unnatural. The final photo was blank, but beneath it, in scrawled handwriting, were the words, "See you tonight." I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The minutes dragged into hours as I sat in my apartment, every creak and groan of the building amplified by my paranoia. I kept every light on, clutching a kitchen knife as if it could protect me from whatever was coming. The air grew heavier as the night deepened, and with each passing moment, my dread intensified. At midnight, the knocking began. It was soft at first, almost polite. 3 steady knocks. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Another 3 knocks followed, louder this time. My phone buzzed on the table, making me jump. A single text message lit up the screen, "Happy birthday, Noah." I didn't move. The knocking turned into pounding, each thud reverberating through the walls. I could hear the faint melody of "Happy birthday to you" being hummed on the other side of the door, the voice low and haunting. Then came the sound of boots, click-clack, pacing just outside. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I approached the door. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The humming stopped. Silence filled the air, so thick it was suffocating. Then, in that same sing-song tone, the birthday boy's voice replied, "To celebrate." The door burst open, though I hadn't unlocked it. The force threw me back, and there he stood. The birthday boy. His proportions were even more distorted than I remembered. His grin stretching impossibly wide, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. He held a wrapped gift in his hands, extending it toward me. "Open it, Noah," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "Leave me alone." His grin faltered for a moment, replaced by something far worse, disappointment. He placed the gift on the floor between us and stepped back. "If you won't open it," he said, his voice now cold and venomous, "I'll open it for you." The box began to shake, the paper tearing itself apart as if an invisible force were ripping it open. Inside was something I can barely describe, a swirling void of darkness and light, emitting a sound that felt like screaming and laughter all at once. It sucked the air from the room, pulling me toward it with an inescapable force. I fought against the pull, but it was futile. The birthday boy stood watching, his grin returned, his eyes alight with sadistic glee. As the void consumed me, I felt my body stretch and twist, my very essence unraveling. The last thing I heard was his voice, whispering in my ear, "Happy birthday, Noah." When I woke up, I was no longer in my apartment. I was standing in that same alley behind the bar, the air thick with smoke and the faint smell of decay. The world around me felt off, the colors muted, the sounds distant. I looked down and saw the cowboy boots on my feet, the same pair that had haunted me since that night. A group of people stood nearby, laughing and talking, oblivious to my presence. I tried to call out to them, but my voice wouldn't come. And then I saw him, standing at the edge of the alley, watching me. The birthday boy tipped his oversized cowboy hat and disappeared into the shadows. Now, I wander, trapped in a cycle I can't escape. I am the new birthday boy, cursed to find the next unsuspecting soul to pass on this twisted gift. And as much as I hate it, I feel the darkness growing inside me, a part of me that revels in the fear, the chaos, the celebration. So, if you ever hear the sound of boots behind you, if a stranger offers you a gift you didn't ask for, run. Because once he finds you, there's no going back. Happy birthday.